talked about arrays before. And so, instead of arrays and lists, we don't do the list in CS1. Okay, we do it in CS2. And I'll just tell you one fundamental difference. An array list, which is only the kind of list we did in CS2, is extensible. You can change the size. And so an array you can't. When you create an array, you can fix the size. You create, you say it has 20 spots, then it has 20 spots. So you can't add more numbers later. You can't remove numbers. You can change what it stores, but it'll always have 20 numbers. And so if you add an array of events, it starts with 20 zeros. Okay? If you had an array list, it would start with nothing. And then every time you add a number, you actually add a new spot. So I'm just saying that's all I'm going to say about lists. Okay, what is the point of this? It is just a playlist. And that would be an iPod, right? Yeah, anyway, we'll get back to playlist. But I mean, a playlist, an array would be a poor choice to store a playlist because you like to be able to add songs to a playlist, don't you? Yes. And so that's one thing you get, is that array lists are better in a lot of situations. Arrays, frankly, take up less space. So arrays are an advantage other times. And so there are two options. Like I said, this course, all you have to learn about is the array. If you find you want to do something that an array is kind of a pain to use, you don't learn how to use array lists, you can do that. Okay, it's an option. But this is all we'll test over. All right. One thing about arrays is the notation is totally different from anything else in Java. Arrays are part of the language. Unlike when I said array list, there's a class called array list. And so you instantiate an array list like you instantiate any other array, like a strings. And strings are also kind of special. You don't have to say new string. You can with a string. In array list, you say new array list, parentheses, create an array list. Not so with array. With array, well, if you're going to create just basically an empty array, and once again, this one's not truly empty because it's full of zeros. You just create it like that. I'll show you another way to create an array that just at the time you create it is filled with the numbers you want. I'm not sure. I'll just show you right now. Another option, if you just list those numbers. And you put that there. You can do that too. Okay? And so if you know what numbers you want to put in the array, just do that at the time of creation. Anyway, now back to what we're looking at. We talked about this before. You know, the size is 10, the length is 10, but there are 9. I mean, the spots are numbered 0 through 9. There are 10 spots, but they're numbered 0 through 9, just like with strings. Okay. In fact, a string uses an array to store its contents. It mentions that arrays are objects, which means, if you look back at this, what does num store? Not the array, but rather the location of the array. Arrays put in memory somewhere, and the variable num stores the location of that. And so, an array is a type of object. Now, like I said, first of all, it says strings are arrays. I need to fix that because that's not true. A string has an array, uses an array to store its characters, okay? But it's not just an array of chars. It's a string object that stores an array of chars, but also has all these other methods that array doesn't have. So it shouldn't be said that way. A string uses arrays, or a string has an array that it uses. So it's like if I want to carry a couple dozen eggs, I couldn't physically carry a couple dozen eggs myself. My hands won't hold that many. I would use a carton, right? And so in this analogy, I'm the string, the carton is the array, and the eggs was the well. And so, like I said, a string is an array, but the object array is, and which is why the numbers are the same in both cases. Its size 10 goes from 0 to 9. We've already said that. And there's what I was talking about as far as the other way to create an array. And this is nice because you can only do this notation at the time you create it. In other words, if later you want to change the arrays, you know what array nums points to, it wouldn't look exactly exactly like this. There's a way to do it, but that code wouldn't actually compile. But at the time of creation, you can do that. And it's nice. It creates the same. In Java, automatically it creates an array just big enough for those 6 numbers, and then fills in what numbers you want. Now, one thing you get, this is one of the biggest things, is when you look at this situation, you have an array of size 10, okay? There are 11 different variables, essentially. So if I say nums, what am I accessing? The array as a whole. So I can say like nums.length, and it'll give me 10, because the length is 10. If I want access to the first spot, I do nums bracket 0. So nums 0, nums 1, nums 2, nums 3, all the way to nums 9 is essentially 10 other variables. And you can treat it like a variable. And I emphasize that because look at where num 0 is in the string. It's on the left side of the equal sign. The only thing you can never put on the left side of the equal sign is a variable. You store into a variable. That's what an assignment operator is, right? It assigns a new value to that variable. When you work, if you want to look at an array list, it doesn't work that way at all. Because with array lists, you have methods, it has a get method, a set method, an add method. But you don't store into it in the same way you do this. So I'm saying, really, that's one big thing to get, is if I do this, what am I accessing? Just the number, the int, that's stored in spot 0, right? And I'm storing into that spot. Whereas, that would make no sense. Because nums is not an int, it's an array. And just as a note, you can't use decimals there for the spot numbers. And here, another way to access the entries. And when you do stuff like this, let me see what it is. Okay. You have to be careful. There's an order of operations issue. So, if I did nums 5 divided by 2. Well, this is totally different from this one. On this one, what happens first? Do we access the spot or do division first? Right? And so, what is 7 divided by 2, by the way? 3.5. Not 3.5. We're in Java, so it's not 3. It's not a decimal sense. It's 3. 2 goes in 7 3 times, right? So, what is the spot 3? The 1. This will do the addition first and get 4, but of course it's going to access what's that spot 4, so if we output the 0, that's that spot 4. And num 6 would be the 5. And then what would this one be? What's the answer? You take half of what's at spot 5? 3. Okay? Now, one thing, obviously, you gotta be careful about this. One mistake that you can make is like here, the length is, what is the length of this array that we're looking at right now? The length is 7, yes?
7.
Is there 7 numbers?
Yes.
But can I do that? No. There is no spot 7, right? And I can't do spot 8, can't do spot 9, can't do spot -1, obviously. So you have to stay within bounds, just like with strings. So that's something you have to be really careful about. And then there's a typical loop. And this, look, we should sure be able to do a for loop. Obviously, we did that. Got that quiz done. We'll do quizzes on REPL again like we did the last quiz. Or just basic code. You have to get it right and get it done in, so much time. And we'll do a few different things with arrays now. One of which is just this. Print out the contents. And just one thing I want you to note. If you're trying to go through a whole string, if it was a string, that would be a linked method, not a linked variable. And really, what did I say a string stores? An array, right? The string linked method just looks at that array's variable, linked variable. But it's once again, a string's not an array, so it had to have an extra method to just access that. So be careful about that. If you put parentheses here when you're trying to work with an array, it won't compile if you'll fail the quiz just because you forgot what these parentheses are. So strings can do one thing with an arrays, it's just a variable. But why? And by the way, just one quick thing. So when you create an array, it fills with zeros or whatever else you said. It also, every array stores its contents and also stores its length. which takes up a little extra space. Why would they store the length of the array? Because you could just figure it out every time, couldn't you? How would you figure out the length of an array? If it wasn't just stored, you'd have to go through and count, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Well, if you have an array of, a million entries, it's kind of a pain to have to calculate that every time, right? And so it's just, when you create the array, it's the length is stored in a variable called length. And it's fixed. Now, I want to talk about the first lab. Good. Now, the goal of the first lab is to go through a list and figure out if it's always increasing or always decreasing. Let's just focus on the always increasing problem. Is the first one an increasing function?
Yes.
I shouldn't say function, it's not a function, mathematically, but it's an increasing list, right? Strictly increasing. Number 2?
Increasing.
Number 3? Obviously not. And number 4?
No.
Where does number 4 fail?
It goes up and goes down. It's a
Right there, right?
Yep.
Now the thing is, you have to think like a computer. In other words, you just looked at these. First one you could just scan, you just looked at it. You don't know how your brain figured out that it's always increasing. You just did it, right? The computer cannot do that. The computer's perspective is it compares 2 things at a time. That's it. So let's start over and figure out how we would know as a computer that the first one really is increasing the whole time. So remember, I said all you can do is compare 2 entries at a time. So let's start at the beginning. So we'll compare those 2 entries. They're in order, yes?
Yes.
Does that mean we should return true right now, that we know the whole thing's in order?
No.
And so we keep going.
Correct.
Because it might be in order, but we don't know yet. And so that's the idea. After you compare those 2, you look at those 2. If they're in order, you keep going. And you compare the 3 and 4, the 4 and 5, and you keep going. When you get all the way to the end, and they're in order, you say, okay, good, I know. The whole thing's done. Which means we're going to have a loop to go through the whole thing. When will it return true?
When it goes through the loop.
But after the loop's done, right?
Yes.
See what I'm saying? So I'm going to show you the code for this. It's a simple code. We need to get the algorithm, first of all. When I get to this one, the third one, when do I know that it's not all the way in order? The third one. Immediately, right? No, but we're saying, I'm just, is it in increasing order?
No, it's not.
Is it always increasing? That's the algorithm we're working on right now. Obviously, it is always decreasing, but it's not always increasing. How do we know? Because the 9 is bigger than the 8.
Yes.
Which means, as soon as we see that, we know the whole thing's not in order. It's not in increasing order. So you return false immediately. The last one, what would we do? We would start off comparing the 3 and 6. They're in order, but we don't return true yet.
Yes.
We compare the 6 and 9. They're in order, so we keep looking. The 9 and 12 are in order, so we keep looking. The 12 and 9 are not in order, so we're done. We know the whole thing's not in order, return false immediately. Okay? And so, look, as far as your lab goes, there's a couple things I want to show you. One is, on this first lab, we're going to create these methods as static methods. Okay? And they're going to be given the array as an input, and notice return true or false. Okay? And I don't remember if this is in the lab already for you. I'll leave this up there. And if you look at the name method, the other class that has a name method, it creates the arrays, and then look how it calls the method. Array funhouse is the name of the class where I put those methods. And so these are static methods, which means you don't create objects. You don't have to create objects to use them. Okay, John? So you just call it by name of the class and then the method you want to call. And so we create our arrays here, and then we pass them in as parameters to these methods you create. Okay? And so, now, what code will you have in here? Basically a loop to go through the whole array. And then, what goes inside the loop? When do we, remember, as we're going through, we're looking at a pair of entries, looking at a pair of entries, looking at a pair of entries. If the 2 entries were in order, Did we return true right then? No. It would continue the loop, right? So, I mean, so that needs to go after loop. I'll just go and fit that right out. So after the loop's done, I'll return true. So what do I put in here? First of all, if, like, the first one, like, the current entry is less than the one after, then return false. That's it. That's the whole idea. And then the going down version, all you do is switch the symbol when it's the same logic. Okay? So, frankly, listen, you've got to get back and get the other loops that I've done. If you want to work on this now, since the scratch I just talked about, you can do that, or you can go working on loop files.